All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Impatient Misfits. Today we have our first official episode of our Word on the Block segment. The word on the block today is that we got a special guest. Give it up. Woo! All right, introduce yourself.
Cassie.
All right, and it's your boy Sean Kill, the host. We are going to be talking about what is hot on the block right now and really what's been hot on the block for a long time. A lot of people have talked about this. A lot of people have shed light on this, and a lot of people have shared their stories throughout YouTube and all these other social media platforms. Today we are talking about child abuse and grooming. So before we get started, I really wanted to take the time to define what that is. For me personally, this is my opinion of what it is. I know that other people at home have their different opinions, and I know that you might have your different opinion as well of what the definition of this is. But for me, child abuse, it's more so like when it leaves the traditional discipline, right? Because we do have discipline, and I want to make sure that we know the difference between discipline and child abuse. But with discipline, I think of like spankings, taking something away, timeouts, having conversation with your kids, and then giving them consequences, stuff like that. But what I think is when we leave that space, it becomes abuse. And what I mean by abuse is, I'll give an example. I had a student. He came to the school and he was telling me like, oh yeah, my dad punished me for getting in trouble at school or something that he had did, I guess, in one of his encores or other classes or whatever. And he revealed to me that his dad punches him in the chest. That's his punishment. To me, that's not discipline. That's child abuse. So that's what I mean when I say like the difference between discipline and abusing, because I feel like in that scenario, when you're punching your kid and you're teaching them to punch other people, because that's what you're doing. If you're punching your kid as their discipline, you cannot get mad when your kid goes to school and punches other people. But before we talk on that segment or that piece, I want to make sure I target the other forms of abuse as well. We have physical abuse. That would be physical abuse. We have emotional abuse. We have verbal abuse. We have sexual abuse. And we also have religious abuse. You know, I don't know if anybody's used that wording, but for me, that's what I call it, religious abuse. So there's abuse in many forms. There can be many different avenues of abuse. And then when it comes to grooming, I would feel like grooming is more so like when you're using manipulation tactics and you're wording things certain ways and you're acting and behaving in a way in which you're trying to manipulate the mind or trick somebody's mind into thinking or believing or doing something that is not conducive to their overall well-being. That to me would be grooming. You're grooming them for a purpose. You're molding them into something through manipulation so that they can be what you want them to be rather than who they actually are. Would you agree or disagree, or what's your definition of child abuse and grooming?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think abuse is any type of any situation where you are using whatever power you have over the other person to control them or to hurt them. And I do think grooming is any type of when you're using any type of power that you have to influence someone. It's just in a way where that might not be appropriate for them.
Okay. So then with my situation that I said earlier, the example I gave, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that is just regular discipline, or do you think that child was being abused?
With a student,
Yeah.
I think that was abuse because there's no lesson behind being punched in the chest besides the fear of being punched in the chest. But that father isn't always going to be there to punch their son in the chest. So what's going to stop him from committing crimes or punching other people in their chest in the future? Because that fear of getting punched in the chest by his father will no longer be there. So there's no real discipline. That's when it becomes abuse.
So what would have been a better method in that situation instead of punching his child in the chest? What would be a better way of dealing with your child? Like, how would you handle that if that was your kid?
It really depends on what they did. It depends on what the student did.
Well, let's say they got in trouble at school because they cussed out their teacher and they pushed a few kids. And so they come back home. You've got the call from the administration office about what your child did. They get suspended, all these things. How could you do something other than punching them in the chest? Because for me, before you answer the question, for me, when you punch your kid in the chest, what I was saying is that I feel like not only are you abusing that child, but you're teaching them that violence is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of times in our community specifically, we are teaching our youth that violence is okay well, not all of us, but in certain neighborhoods and certain environments, they're teaching children that violence is okay by giving those type of disciplinary actions that they've learned from their parents. Because it's highly likely that that parent or that father got punched in his chest by his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a cycle in which we're teaching violence. So you can't get mad at your son if he then goes to school and start punching people in their face, because discipline to him is punching, getting punched. So why would he not punch other people when he feels like they're doing him wrong? When he's having a dispute with his friends, why would he not just get up and swing? Because that's what he was taught to do.
Right.
So,
Well, if he was arguing with his teacher and pushing people, first I would address, the verbal part, because I would want to know what got him that upset. Because for some reason, people think talking to your child about why they did what they did is so outrageous, and you should never stoop down to their level. And I just think that's wrong. I feel like, kids are, I don't even feel like, this is a fact. Kids are people too. They have feelings, they have a thought process. So you have to, if you want your child, this is a person that you brought into this world that you should understand. If it's anybody's responsibility to stoop down to their level, it's yours. So I would want to know what caused my kid to do that. I would want them to feel comfortable enough to tell me, oh, the teacher said something I didn't like. Sometimes they could be defending you. The teacher could have said, oh, your mom must not be taking care of you right at home. And he got mad because how dare someone disrespect my mom, and told her to shut the F up. And then came home after she only told what your child did and not what she did to provoke your child, and you discipline your child. And how he takes it is he's wrong for sticking up for you.
So what you're saying is that verbal piece, like really getting to the bottom of the situation, trying to figure out from the beginning to the end what's going on, what was said, what happened.
What caused him to react like that. That would be the first thing I would do. I would address him pushing other people after, because that could have been the aftermath.
Right.
Of him being upset and not knowing how to control his anger because he was ignored, dismissed, or disciplined for reacting. So he could have taken it out on a kid that said what happened, and he was too upset to explain himself, and not being able to communicate because no one is allowing him to communicate. The only thing he can do is get physically violent. So he could have pushed those students after being ignored or dismissed by his teacher. So I would want to know why he, what started everything.
I would agree. I feel like verbally speaking to your child first, and then based off of the information that you receive, using consequences. But I will say that some parents are enablers. And I think some parents enable their child's bad behavior. And they're going to say that they're doing the verbal piece only to say that, oh, well, I heard my child out. My child was right because it's y'all, trying to make my child upset, and constantly pointing the finger at everybody else except for their child, which doesn't give their child any accountability. And so the behavior gets worse and worse and worse, and then they become an entitled brat. Yeah. So I do believe you're right about the verbal part, as long as it's actually you're doing it correctly, and you're not going in the conversation knowing that you're going to believe every single thing that your child says, and you're actually going to get to the bottom and really do an investigation of what's going on.
Yeah. The whole point of me trying to understand why my child did that isn't so that they could be right, because there's no reasonable explanation for bad behavior. I just want to understand the problem so I can address the root of it, because slapping my child up, taking their tablet wouldn't fix the issue unless I know what the issue is. So it's just so I know what the issue is. So if they say, oh, the teacher disrespected you, I would tell them, you don't need to stick up for me. Not in that way. If your teacher says something about me, just ignore her, because she's going to have her opinion. And guess what? There's a million people before you were born even that had opinions of mommy. You don't have to yell at all of them. Sometimes you just have to ignore her. That's all, because you can't stop her from feeling how she feels. She's going to say it to you. You get mad at her, she can say it to someone else, and you're not going to be there to say anything. She's still going to say it. You're not really stopping her from doing anything. So just ignore her. Or tell her, well, actually, my mom is like this. Or tell her, if you have something to say about my mom, you can talk to her and let the adults handle it, because that's an adult's place. I would still, at the end of the day, he would still get a punishment for pushing the other kids. But I would explain to him why he's being punished, because that's another important part of discipline, is telling them why they're being disciplined. I remember growing up always being confused what I did wrong. Of course, being older, I know what I did wrong now, but it's only from being older, not because it was explained to me. Being slapped up after doing something and being genuinely confused to the point where I thought my parents just hated me and just enjoyed hitting me. They never told me why I was being punished. I would tell them like, well, because like I understand why you got upset with your teacher, but you shouldn't use words like that. So because I would now that's when the punishment also has to connect to the root of the problem. Like if they're saying shut the F up, I'm gonna take your tablet because I'm assuming that's where you got that language from. And I want to stop you from using that language. I'm assuming you got it from some streamer because that's where a lot of influences come from, influencers, obviously. So I would take away whatever influence is causing you to react like that. That's what the punishment would be. And for the pushing the kids, that's also whatever caused them, whatever I believe caused them to do that, because I would be monitoring my own child to know what's causing that, if it's their father even, because sometimes you think there's influences you can't stop, like an abusive spouse. I would just explain to them like, dad isn't okay, he doesn't know how to handle his emotions, but we want you to be better than us. Both me and dad, we want you to be better than us. Dad's still learning to control his emotions and to talk them out instead of getting physically violent. But you don't want to be like dad because you see how he's always angry. You want to be happy. So try not to use your hands. That's how I would deal with them. But if it's some influence I cannot control, the only thing I could do is try to make the child better than that influence.
Well, that's fair. So then moving on in this conversation, because I really want to get deep, have you personally experienced any form of child abuse or grooming that you can share, that you would feel comfortable sharing with the rest of us?
Yes, I have both. I've experienced child abuse and I've experienced grooming. Many forms of child abuse, physical, spiritual, verbal, drug abuse. I've experienced a lot of different types of abuse. The one abuse that I think stands out the most, because a lot of kids don't experience it, would be the substance abuse. My very first time being introduced to substances by someone who is, I don't want to give too much credit and say a parental figure because that's earned. But I would say someone who was supposed to be that. I was a minor, and the first thing I was introduced to, I would say, was alcohol. It was more of in my face. Not that I wanted to try alcohol. It was the only thing that was available in the refrigerator. There wasn't juice, there wasn't water, milk, or anything like that. The only thing that was available was alcohol. So it was either alcohol or popsicles. But I didn't know at the time that it was alcohol. I'm just thinking that's his drink. That parent, quote unquote, drink. So I'm not thinking it's alcohol. So I drink it and, I get a little tipsy and he's aware that I'm drinking it. He makes a lighthearted joke and allows me to continue drinking, which I believe is wrong. You shouldn't do that. I don't think you should put alcohol around your kids to begin with. But if they do find it and start drinking it, you should never allow them to continue to drink it. I feel like that's inappropriate. I wasn't old enough to be even near alcohol. Had I been near a ABC store, at that age, people would have thought to call the police. That's how young I was. So that would be the first thing. The first time I was introduced to alcohol, introduced to it, but not where I can call it substance abuse. That was just my first time being around or drinking alcohol. Now, marijuana, that was more of a substance abuse thing because I was guilt tripped into smoking. Me and my siblings were guilt tripped into smoking marijuana.
By a parental figure?
Yes, by this parental figure.
Wow.
So he had us sitting in a circle and passing a blunt, spliff, whatever people like to call it these days, around in a circle around, I'd say the ages were 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 16, because there's a bit of a gap between some of my siblings. So we were definitely way too young to be smoking weed. It was passed around. Some of my siblings, my sister, I'll say, wasn't interested. She wanted the blunt to completely pass her. She didn't want anything to do with it. And that's when the guilt tripping was going on. Like, oh, well, this is a peace treaty and the rest of us are accepting peace and you're not accepting peace. You're choosing to, be the outstand, to make her feel like she is missing out on something that's good.
Would that be part of grooming? Because they're being told that we are all making peace and you're refusing to make peace.
Yeah.
So you are the problem. And that's like a way of manipulating that person's mind to say you're the issue.
Yeah.
And the only way to resolve the issue is for you to also hit the blunt.
Doing exactly what that person wants you to do. Yeah, it's definitely grooming and manipulation and abuse all mixed together. Just sitting in that one circle. Yeah, that was when after that, just like the alcohol, the marijuana was just sitting around for anyone, just a free for all for anybody to smoke and do all of that. Alcohol continued to be available to us growing up around this parental figure. So did marijuana. We at times would have to purchase this marijuana. It would come out of our pocket, like at around 14 to 16 when we started working to get our life together, not to purchase marijuana. Our money was being used to purchase marijuana. Even if we didn't personally smoke, we still would have to contribute to the marijuana because it's considerate or whatever excuse he had at the time why we should contribute.
So, yo, I'm sorry, that's crazy to me. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. So, wait, I'm trying to understand. So, you and all of your working siblings had to put in money to purchase marijuana because it was like a courteous thing to do. Like, even if you're not smoking it, at least you're putting it in so it's available in the household for whoever wants to smoke it.
Yes, but at that time it was just me and my little brother.
Okay.
Who was getting more influence than I was. A lot more. I was less into the smoking and more into drinking. But that was me and my younger brother. My older siblings, they didn't want anything to do with this parent because that parent wasn't present, and I guess they believed they moved past it, so they stopped dealing with this parent. But my little brother wanted to have this parent in his life. I didn't, but I wanted to be there for my little brother. We've always went through everything together, so I just added, charged that to the game. Like, I'm going to be there with him through this too. So that's why I was there. So it was just me and my brother at that time when we started having to put money in for the marijuana and stuff like that.
Wow. So that would be, honestly, there's a lot of different kinds of abuse in that. Like how you were touching on earlier, like you said, it was a mixture of manipulation, peer pressure, influence, guilt tripping. The substances, all of that. So how in your adult life, looking back on that, like, are you affected by that, or do you just kind of like brush it out like it never happened? Like, how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that?
I have a natural let me try to stop using big words and just talk like how I talk. So
that's right. Just relax.
Yeah,
it's like the camera's not here.
Okay, yeah. I'm naturally triggered by marijuana now these days. Like I can't even be near it. If I smell it, or if I even just a tiny little pull, like while my friends are laughing like, oh, you barely touched it, I'm sitting there having a full-on panic attack. Because there's so much PTSD surrounding marijuana for me. And it's not just the fact that it was introduced to me while I was young. It's not just the fact that it was used to control me, because that's another one of the abuse. The substance abuse leads to the spiritual abuse. So that was one of the trauma that I went through. He would get us high so that we would believe these outrageous religious beliefs that he made up. I'm gonna say made up because there was no evidence really. It was all over the place. Like, it was some new African religion and mixed with Muslim, and it just was all over the place. It seemed like he just smashed it together, made himself the god of the religion, got us high, and tried to convince us that was the real religion. So, yeah, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of scary things came with stuff like that. You should never play with God. Just put that out there ever, right. Because that's a very scary thing to do. You're going to go through a spiritual warfare doing stuff like that, especially if you put yourself as God. And I believe he's still suffering. He's still getting punished for that till this day. But I participated in, and not in the way he wanted me to, but out of fear. I'm gonna say out of fear because he had too much power over me, and I didn't have anyone to run to. I didn't. It's not like I could say he's crazy. Come, like, help me. You know, there's no one I could run to say that. I was stuck.
Oh, it makes sounds in the studio sometimes. You're good.
Okay, yeah, I was stuck with this guy. So no hero or nothing like that. So that made it 10 times scarier. And it was a lot of scary stuff that happened around the time where I was smoking weed with him and all that. So I have PTSD till this day. Every time I smell weed, get high, any type of way, even if I just get a vaping, if I hit it too much and feel a buzz, I immediately start panicking. Alcohol, I'm disgusted by. I love me some wine, but I can't. Once I start to get drunk, like close to drunk, I get sick. Like, and I don't mean like a normal sick. Like, you know, I'm telling you, I was an alcoholic, so I should never even feel that. I should be enjoying the whole thing, but no, I wasn't enjoying it. As soon as I get close to drunk, I want to throw up all over the place, and it's not because I'm drunk. I'm not drunk yet. I just feel sick off the fact that I'm almost drunk. So that's how it's affected me now. But that's years of smoking and drinking starting from a very young age. My body, my mind wasn't even fully developed yet where I should be anywhere near any substances. So it did, I would say it affected some of my growth, but I've always been resilient. So, and I've always been the type to fight against anything that I feel is destroying me. So I did move past it. I can go days without even thinking about alcohol or weed or anything like that. I fought past it. My brother, he also fought past it, but was sadly dragged right back in because he forgot that, you know, like I was saying earlier with abuse, you have to cut off the root of the issue. He did not cut off the root of the issue. I did.
Do
So
you think
the
it
abuse
was
started again.
back to what you said? Like you said that he wanted that parent figure in his life, like he had a desire to have that parent in his life because he didn't experience that. So cutting off the root of the problem would mean cutting off that parent, and so
Yeah.
he had a hard time doing that fully.
Yep. That's what exactly what it was. Yeah.
It's funny, and it's funny that you say that because I remember he called me because I obviously I know her siblings and stuff. So he had called me and he was telling me on the phone like, "Hey, like I'm kind of done with this weed smoking thing. Like I feel like when I'm not smoking weed, I remember our exact conversation. He called me. He was like, I feel like when I'm smoking weed, I feel like it's just clouding my mind. So it's not letting me do things that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to accomplish things. Like he had goals and all that type of stuff. So there was a lot of things that he was trying to do in his life, especially as a young person. And so I remember him being on the phone telling me like, yeah, he's gonna go like cold turkey. He's gonna cut it off. Like he's not gonna smoke any more weed. And then like months later, I thought that's what he was doing, and then I found out later on that he was smoking again. And I was like, dang, I was just remembering that conversation that we had. And it's easier said than done. I always like to point that out. Like when you become addicted to something, it's hard to cut it off completely. I feel like addiction shows up in so many different ways. For some people, it's weed, it's alcohol. For me personally, I always had a weight problem growing up, so for me it was food. That was my addiction. Whenever I felt anxiety or whenever I felt like I was going through something or whenever I felt angry or anything like that, I always went to food. That was like my safe thing. So it's like it's easier said than done to walk away from something when you have an addiction to something because of not necessarily doing the act, but the feeling that doing the act brings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
say that I didn't have an addiction to marijuana. It felt like more something he was using to control me
Yeah.
versus alcohol, which he made it. He the way he introduced it to us is what makes it. That's what makes it either an addiction or abuse because with alcohol, he made it seem like it was my choice to continue drinking or not. Mind you, the first time I was introduced to it was when I found it in the refrigerator, drank it already, and he said, "Oh yeah, it's fine." You know, so that makes it seem more like a choice since that was the introduction. So alcohol became my addiction because I felt like I chose that versus marijuana, which I've never shown any interest in until I was pressured into it. So the only reason why I can say I continue to smoke on my own or like when I was little stealing the weed and smoking it on my own after he introduced it to us was because I didn't want to be around him. But when I was high and if he has any truth in his body, he can testify to this. But I don't really need him to testify because God is my witness. when I was high, he was a lot more tolerable because in the way I took the high was like he wasn't real. And I even told him this while I was high, like, oh yeah, you're not real. You're a fake dad. You're a part of my imagination. Like it's like I didn't have to accept the reality of who he was while I was high. I could just pretend like he was a normal dad, pretend like he was fun and funny and not like he was abusive, and I could pretend like I had a good dad while I was high until he started the spiritual abuse while we were high. That was when I started pulling away from marijuana because now there was a PTSD attached, well, a trauma attached to the marijuana, and that's when I stopped smoking. Versus my brother, he made it seem like he turned it from a peace treaty, which the reason why that works so well on my brother is because he's the one who wanted a father, mind you. The rest of us didn't care for one, so we didn't. Sorry.
Yeah,
we didn't give a fuck about peace. He did. So he was going to smoke that blunt and pass it around because he want peace he want all of us like, oh yeah, look, our dad's back in our life. Let's make peace and stuff. And we're like, Haja, we don't care. Like, we don't care. But he cared. So that's why it worked so well on him, the peace treaty thing. Then he went from peace treaty to the spiritual, before he went to spiritual abuse with my brother, he made it a bro thing. He went back and forth from spiritual abuse to us bros smoking together. Like
making it his homie instead of his, instead of a parent-son, like a father-son relationship, it was more like I'm your homeboy type thing. Is that what you're saying?
And Haja is a loner by nature. He's a lovable person, so he's never alone, but he's a loner by nature. And his father presented himself like he was also a loner by nature when he actually is alone. That's the difference. He's not lovable. So he's not a loner by nature or by choice. He's a loner because nobody wants to be around him. Versus my brother, who is very lovable and people love to be around him, but he naturally pulls himself away. And that's also because of trauma, but it isn't my place to say what his trauma is. But that's another thing he used for the bro bond that they had. Because this is stuff that, I would know about my brother because I grew up with him. And his father would constantly compete with me about who knew my brother better, which I thought was very weird. You're pushing 50. You wouldn't even understand his mentality the way I would. And when you weren't changing his diaper, guess who was? Me at my little age. So, yeah.
Okay.
Just need to put that out there. So... yeah, but that's what I believe he was doing with my brother. He was trying to feed off of the loner thing. So, and that also helped him isolate him. It helped him isolate him.
Which is another manipulation tactic.
And
one thing that a groomer will do is they will isolate that person that they're grooming and make them feel like nobody else loves them. And what I noticed about your brother is that even because he makes music and stuff as well, and even in his music and stuff, he always talked about like this being alone, like almost like this nobody loves me type music. And it reminded me of different artists like Juice WRLD and XXX, and like it gave me those type of vibes in the sense of where they were talking about being alone, feeling isolated, things of that nature, and like just having that whole aesthetic. And do you feel like that's because, do you think that was always where he was going and that would have just shown up in his music naturally, or do you feel like because of this situation that took him into that kind of dark place?
That's a very well, it's not very, it's a little bit complicated to answer because my brother has a lot of trauma and his father took advantage of the trauma he already had and used it to control him. So I can't say that he caused my brother to feel alone, but he fed into it. Like my brother has, when he was younger, he was this adorable little thing with a pot belly. And he just was so tiny and cute. But we didn't come from a family where we were loving, like where we do stuff like, oh, you're so cute. And then, that only happens with babies. Once you reach a certain age, you get the hard, tough love. And when you do that to children, they reflect that same love to their siblings, their cousin. So it kind of makes it hard for them to truly actually like show real genuine bonds and love with each other. So we kind of picked on Hydra. That was our way of showing love to him. Cuteness, aggression. We had cuteness, aggression with Hydra, but he's the baby and he's a very loving person. So that didn't register very well with him. He took that as bullying, and we didn't know until he wrote us a letter, because Hydra was a very intelligent kid, like so much that he wrote a letter on the wall like, it was not me putting the boogers on the wall. And we're like, he spelled booger wrong. He didn't spell it wrong. He spelled it right, and we didn't know that it was spelled like that.
I'm weak.
And he's the youngest, so he's always been the intelligent one. So he told us, like, how we were hurting his feelings, and we slowly tried to break off of it, because mind you, we didn't know how to show like compassion and care and love the right way, because we weren't shown it. So we were trying to break away from the bullying and into more loving. But the breaking away from bullying happened, but the showing more caring and loving, we didn't know how to do that. So we ended up just distancing ourselves completely, so we didn't hurt him anymore, and that made him feel alone. The thing about Haja is he was the baby. So because he was the baby, like I said earlier, only the babies experienced, oh, you're so cute, you're so cute. So he experienced that more than we did. Because when we came around the family, we were older and he was younger. So he got the you're so cute treatment more than we did. So he needed that. And he wasn't getting it from us because we didn't really know how to show it. So that was part of the reason why I think that's the main reason why he was a loner. And Hodges, sadly, he holds grudges, but not the way that he should. He holds grudges where he'll beat himself up instead of saying, oh, I'm not going to deal with you in this way because of what you did to me. He's going to beat himself up like something is wrong with him. And
like,
so,
what did he do in the situation
exactly.
to cause it? Okay.
So he did that after that because we didn't know what to do next. And he never really sat down and had a conversation with us. But how would he know? We didn't come from a house where communicating was a thing. It was only anger and frustration and arguing.
Do you feel like that's like a black community thing? Like,
yes.
We don't do well with communicating our feelings?
Generational trauma. So yeah, so we never talked about it with Hodges. So he held it in. So, but the problem is that we were working on ourselves. We were working on ourselves as siblings because we wanted to love each other. We wanted to be there for each other. We wanted to support each other. So we were working on ourselves, working on our love languages. First, we would get partners and, reflect the same love that our partners would show back to them, and then, reflect it in an appropriate way back to our siblings. Well, that's what we were doing because we didn't know any other way to experience love. Our mom is loving, and we would like to reflect her love that she showed us to each other too. That's all we could do until we understood how to show love to each other. So we were trying to do that. So it was starting with us babying each other, like how our mom baby was pinching each other's cheeks and stuff. That's how it started. And then it started easing more into respecting personal space and talking about things and, getting mad and then coming back and apologizing. That's what we started turning into that. But we didn't get to go there fully before his father came into his life and fed off the trauma that he still had inside of him and told him, no, you feel like that because you are alone and you're just like me and nobody really cares about you. He fed onto the trauma that my brother had and used that. He said, oh yeah, I feel the same way, I'm an outcast too, but he's an outcast because of his ways. Haja was an outcast because of, by choice, because he felt like that's where he belongs, even though it wasn't. And his father was an outcast because that's where other people felt like he belongs.
So playing devil's advocate just a little bit, right? Not saying that your father is any kind of victim or anything like that. But I always wondered this, and I want to ask you this. So in this situation that you're, saying, do you feel like due to the fact that your father was raised in a home that didn't express, love and all that type of stuff in the way that we would consider healthy, that along with being locked away for a long period of time and going in at a certain age, do you think that he still when he came out, he still had the mentality of the age he had when he went in?
Yeah, I'm going to move the mic a little bit close for this because this is something a lot of people don't think about. When you go through stuff, that is a reason, but it's not an excuse. It's a reason to be angry. It's a reason to do it, but it's not an excuse. You are fully, especially at your big age, you are fully capable of working on yourself. And I would know that because I'm 22 years old and I've gone through stuff that could have made me this, people already paint me this way, but in reality, it could have made me a very angry, aggressive, mean, selfish, self-centered person. And I'm actually really not. I will allow you to believe I'm that way if I feel like I need you to stay away from me. People that I don't deal with are, you're more than welcome to see me however you feel like seeing me. But I chose to work on myself. Like I was saying with my siblings, even at our young age, we didn't know how to love each other, and we taught ourselves love so that we could show it to each other. So you're fully capable of change. If we could do it as kids, you can do it as an adult. So I can't excuse it. It's a reason, but it's not an excuse.
So where do you go from here as far as healing? How do you plan to heal? How do you plan to address the abuse that you went through as a child? How do you plan to address the grooming that you experienced and the manipulation that you went through? Like, how does that look? Actually, but before you answer that, I want to get more into that religious abuse because I need more information on that. How does somebody abuse you religiously, if that makes sense?
Well, I feel like abusing someone is basically just using something that should be safe against them, like if they're living with you and you use the fact that they're living with you as a weapon, like, oh, you live here, you don't work. Or if they're a Christian and you use the fact that they're Christian to abuse them, like, oh, God said this and God said that. Like, I feel like that's abuse when you use something that should be safe as a weapon to hurt that child or person. Like, oh, I pay the bill so I can beat you up. If you use your power or some type of power to hurt that person is abuse. So how you can use religion, I kind of answered it already, but to religion to abuse someone is by, like I said, is taking it and saying, well, God said this, God said that, but using it to hurt that person. The way I was abused was similar to that, except the religion was completely made up. So what he did, why it ties to the substances, was he would get us high and he would tell us these imaginary stories like, oh, I got arrested and I was held on the ground and I looked up and everybody in the neighborhood eyes were red and anger that I was being arrested. What you want to know what my interpretation? My interpretation was that you were the local drug dealer and all of your high ass clients was looking outside at the fact that they drug dealer got arrested and you yourself were high, and that's why you imagined it that way. Then he said he was arrested and he was sent to prison or jail, and when he was there he shook the whole prison or jail.
Like the Goliath story, like when he
Yeah, he held the
basically.
bars and shook the whole prison. Apparently he would get us high and say stuff like that for us
So
to believe.
okay, I'm trying to think deeper. I'm really trying hard to try to understand the psyche of somebody that is saying these things. So for him, being that he was isolated, now you said like your brother, he was isolated because he felt like that's where he should be, even though it wasn't where he should have been. But with your father, you said he was isolated because that's where everybody put him, right? So being that everybody puts him in that isolation, does he then feel alone to the point where he can convince himself in his mind that people care about him? So when he's going through those traumatic experiences like being arrested, he convinces himself that people cared enough to be angry for him, and he created this whole illusion in his mind in order to feel like he mattered to somebody, in order to cope with not mattering to people in his head and being isolated.
Yeah, that's extremely possible. Like, it
Yeah.
sounds extremely accurate. I wasn't there, so I can't say if it was, but that sounds accurate. Only thing I could say is what he told me. He did have my mother and their friend at that time who he was bumming off of, so I'm sure he couldn't have been that lonely if somebody was supporting his lifestyle. But he is the type of person to be ungrateful, so there's a chance that regardless of him being supported financially or with a roof over his head or whatever way they were helping him, that he still felt alone because he's the type of person to not appreciate the people there for him and always want more. So that's still a possibility.
This is deep. Yeah. I mean, well, as far as physical abuse, I don't think I've ever experienced that. So it's very good hearing from somebody that's actually experienced it to understand it more, and have a better insight on it. But as spiritual abuse, I would feel like that. I feel like in my family, I feel like I experienced that, and I think all of us younger people experienced that. Now, some experienced it way worse than others. For me, I feel like it was extremely light. But I think in the sense of spiritual abuse, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I feel like this could be a form of spiritual abuse, but I felt like for me, I was being manipulated in the sense of fire and brimstone. Like, if you're not doing what God wants you to do, hellfire is your portion. If you're not doing the things that God, not in my immediate home, because my parents are pretty good about keeping that balance of reality. But like my extended family, when we go to the family church and stuff like that, I feel like they used a lot of fear to convince you to do things. And then when you did things that they didn't like, they would say, well, God is not pleased. When in fact, it's not God who's not pleased. It's them who are not pleased.
Yeah, I experienced that too. And
Yeah.
I did mention that when people use God, as an abuse tactic, any type of power, whether it be your power or a greater power that you use to hurt or control someone, is abuse. I did experience that as well. I feel like people use fear for control too much.
Yeah.
Like, you try to scare people into doing things your way. And that's abuse. That's definitely a form of abuse. Sometimes I feel like there can be a better approach with the whole religion and talking about heaven and hell. There can be a better approach if you make it more of like a choice. Like, you're choosing to go to hell. Don't say, oh, you're damned or anything like that. That's what you're choosing. You're choosing to do this and that, knowing that it will lead to hell.
And I think that's what I kind of feel like. I feel like in the sense of religion, you definitely have to tell people, if you're a leader in the church, I feel like you have to tell people like, hey, this is what I believe. This is my interpretation of the Bible. However, you should read it for yourself and get your own understanding and interpretation, and let God speak to you and however he's going to do that for you. And you need to determine based off of what you've read what's right and wrong so that you can live the best version of a righteous life, since that's what they're constantly pushing. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like leaders don't do that. They make their own interpretation of the Bible or whatever religion it is. It could be any religion, right? They use their own interpretation of what they've read, and they want you to believe that same interpretation rather than reading it for yourself. So a lot of people will argue, their religious beliefs and values, but you'll find out those same people never really read the entire book. They kind of just read pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And they use those pieces to justify stuff, but they don't actually have a real understanding, or they'll just repeat and regurgitate whatever their pastor said to them or their religious leader said instead of reading the book, because they're too lazy to do that. But anyway, that's another topic for another time. Make sure that you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Again, I want to thank Cassie for coming on the podcast. I feel like you gave us a lot of insight on different forms of abuse, and I definitely appreciate the fact that you shared your story with us, because that's a lot. That's a lot. So thanks again for tuning in. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe, and we're out.